Hi everyone, welcome to the new episode of the Prime View series of interviews with top business and technology leaders. How often do you buy anything without considering the product, without reading reviews or checking ratings? Probably not that often. Well, how about buying something because of your friends or industry experts' recommendations? This is exactly how influencer marketing works. In this interview episode, we are talking with Bryan Pedersen, Chief Innovation Officer at MSL Group, one of the largest PR agencies in the world with over 100 offices across 40 countries. Bryan tells us why brands are massively turning to influencer marketing, how they are effectively measuring it. We talk about marketing tools and data-driven insights, and how not every social media impression was meant to be equally effective. Well, it's a great interview, and I believe that you will learn a lot despite the industry or domain you're working in. So stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a great pleasure and actually honor to have you here joining the Prime View. And my first question is about your background. If you could tell our listeners a little bit about your background and the steps in your career that have led you to your current position at MSL.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always been digital. I was fortunate to graduate college right in the dot-com kind of growth and a little bit of the bubble as well in the early 2000s. I worked for a number of startups right out of school. I worked for one. We were one of the biggest mobile technology providers, and we did all of the original mobile content. We raised a lot of money in the US, close to 70 million. From there, I went to a couple other startups. I worked with British Telecom. They have an incubator out in Astral Park, working on kind of I would say GPS or location-based targeting, or the early days of location-based targeting. I spent a little time on the client side. I worked at Viacom when they were starting to embrace mobile and starting to get into digital streaming and video. And then I moved over a little bit later, I would say in my 30s, into the agency side. So I started working for a number of different digital agencies. I worked for Accenture Interactive when they had first started getting into the agency business. I worked at a media agency, and I started a social agency there. And then finally, I moved over into PR recently in the last couple of years, first at Omnicom with Fleischmann and MMC, and then finally now over at Publicis with MSL.
Yeah, that's a fantastic, that the transition of your role, right? That how you built your career. That's remarkably interesting. Also, I would be, Bryan, I would be interested to know about your ability to motivate people, right? How do you build the high-performance teams, right? Specifically at MSL, since you are global and probably one of the largest PR companies in the world with lots of locations, lots of offices, if I'm not mistaken, like 30 countries and over 100 offices, right? So how do you build these high-performance teams?
I think it is a challenge, because I think that the agencies don't have that monopoly on talent anymore. There's so many options for smart digital, just like I was saying before, startups, digital companies, tech companies, they're pulling in so much of the talent. I don't think you have to motivate, I would say, those kinds of people, because I think they gravitate, they're very naturally, they want to try new things, learn new things, do new things, learn every day. So the digital talent out there, I think, is so strong. I think it's been so much a question of us, how do we bring them in? And one of the things that I think we've done well is we've given them exposure across all of Publicis Group. So even though an agency may not be as exciting maybe for as a tech startup that's raising a lot of money and trying to change something very dramatically, I think that we've built a bit of a hybrid model where we are tackling some of these challenges. We are working with these startups very closely, and we're starting to embrace a lot more of that mentality and that style of working. But by the same token, we also do have a lot of scale. So one example is that we're the biggest buyer of all of the media on companies like Google and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. So we have these relationships, and we're able to get access to new products, new tools, working very closely and changing how that is, honestly affecting tens, if not millions, hundreds of millions of people. So I think that scale and I think that ability to kind of have a big impact, I think that's been one of our ways that we've attracted and I guess excited talent.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Maybe you could tell a little bit more how this huge organization can be as innovative as a startup, right? So there might be, some people might see great enterprises that they might be resilient to innovations or not as flexible, right? So having your role, how do you see this huge organization being innovative?
I think that we've really embraced technology across the board, and that goes from Publicis at the top. I think one of the biggest acquisitions in the space was the acquisition of Epsilon, one of the biggest data providers in the world. Very significant acquisition. There's a lot of movement towards this idea of a platform world and a digital first world. And a lot of our offerings are all starting to kind of, I would say, complement and encircle that kind of a future. So we've been very good at that. And then from an MSL perspective, we've also had a very clear challenge, and that's that PR has never been measured effectively. It's always been a little bit behind when it came to the advancements in digital media, analytics, measurement, attribution. So we have a really straightforward story, and what we're saying is we want to solve that challenge for PR, that challenge of how do you measure it and how do you scale it. Everyone knows it's valuable. Everyone's been doing it for decades. And I think it's actually growing in importance because of what we're seeing around brands and reputation and social movements happening online and how quickly these things can turn and affect businesses. But we're really focused on that. And I think that our model has been to work directly with those founders, with those startups, build together, build kind of that partnership. And I think that we've been successful to date. And I think there's still a huge amount to kind of, ground to cover as well.
Okay, excellent. So, marketing, I would be specifically interested in, from my perspective, right, being a founder of the PrimeView, I would be specifically interested about marketing strategies and tactics, right, that you use, right, that you leverage at MSL that also somehow combine technology. As you said, technology are driving now, there's something very important to founder and customers where you have to show that, the measured result, right? So what kind of technologies do you leverage at MSL to prove the effectiveness of your PR strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the largest change kind of the marketing world has been this huge growth of digital media, mainly because it's so measurable, it's so attributable. And you don't get that with some of the traditional marketing, whether it's TV commercials or events or different things that brands do every day. So all this money has kind of shifted over to the digital world, again, because you can count every click, you can count every impression, you know where every dollar is going. You can target people in such a deep way with so many audience segmentations. But it's taken away a little bit from, again, what is it that really drives people to really take action? What really influenced someone to go and buy something, try something, change their behavior? And one of the things that we've been doing is, back to kind of this idea of PR, right? When you're influenced by something externally, when an expert or someone that you trust or respect, and they tell you that this is something that you should try, that has tremendous value. It's just been very hard to measure that. So we've worked a lot on getting real data into this world. So taking a lot of the best practices from the digital media world, bringing it into PR. We're using a lot of ad tech actually that's been repurposed for PR. Things like understanding who's reading what and how deeply are they really paying attention to those things? Are they sharing those things on social? Because that's how all of this information spreads. Are they searching for it, and are they finding it? Are they talking about it? So we're combining all of those realms of really that core digital human behavior, and we're bringing that all back, and we're using that to A, show the effectiveness of that content or that earned content, and B, also being smart about how we plan for some of those things. And then I would say it's also about really where is the audience. So we know that social influencers, it's a huge opportunity. A lot of brands are being very successful. In fact, a lot of the startups and direct to consumer brands that you see every day, that they're growing these huge businesses on Instagram. We've taken a lot of those tactics. We've built one of the largest influencer marketing platforms in the world. And we're scaling that out across all the platforms, whether that be Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, et cetera. But again, we're focused on what is really working for these brands, right? Because I think that there's always this tendency to move back to, again, traditional marketing metrics. How many impressions can I get? Is that really effective? And you look at these brands that grow these enormously passionate communities. They have people talking about it. They're not even paying half of them half the time. And that's the kind of marketing that I think is exciting and that we're really focused on trying to replicate. This idea of maybe not every impression is created equal. You can pay your way into millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of impressions, but do those impressions really influence that person? And one of the things that we do know is that when you start to generate some of this great coverage, or you have a credentialed or a third party or an expert saying that this is the best product, or this is something that you should try, or you should do this, that certainly does influence people. We're seeing it on the influencer front. We're working now on some larger studies as to, again, the overall effectiveness of some of those things. We're starting to, for example, within the influencer marketing space, we're starting to connect directly to sales. I think influencer marketing has always been so much about getting a lot of pictures out there from these influencers. You're paying them, you get some impressions, but they're not connecting it down to sales. We're doing that now. We're taking some of the methodologies, these kind of multi-sell studies, and bringing that to influencer marketing and saying, we don't want to measure this like PR. We want to measure this like digital marketing, and we want to be able to attribute these things back. And then it opens this other door, which is, it's maybe not one or the other, but it's all of those things really feeding each other. And that's ultimately where we want to move brands, because if you can't say that one is necessarily better than the other. They're just fulfilling different roles. And if you as a consumer, you see an ad for something, you might buy it, but you're probably gonna research it. That's just the world we live in. You compare everything: flights, hotels, restaurants, food, anything, products. You wanna see something, and that something is probably a piece of earned content, PR content, a review, a rating, a user review, an influencer, how they're using it in their day-to-day life. And then that's gonna convince them. And then eventually the advertising should probably come back again and retarget that person after they've been convinced, after they've consume this content, and that should convert them at a higher rate. So all this should, in theory, it should really work together to drive someone from complete unawareness all the way down to a conversion.
So it's a complex cycle, right? So it's not only one thing that actually converts a person to sales. There should be multiple cycles that actually make sure that you get that client, right, for the brand.
That's definitely it. I mean, I think everyone has seen these. There's no such thing as a linear consumer journey anymore. It's, this kind of circle. But I think the biggest and most important point in that, and this was actually a quote from the Salesforce CMO, and he said that there is no unconsidered decision anymore. And I think that is so true. We live in a world, we have so much information at our fingertips, that everything from a major purchase like a car, all the way down to table salt. And Google has some great studies where they've actually tracked user journeys for people Googling information around all these different types of salt. I mean, salt is it's $1, $2 commodity, but that's the world we live in. There's no reason for anything to be unconsidered. So we need to really rethink how we're effectively driving people when they control that journey. That's really the important part. It's not even a circle. It's that person controls every step. They have all the information, and our job is to convert them. We need to be in all those places that they're going to look for that credential and that advice.
Yeah, that's fascinating. But you know what, Bryan, it's like for different brands, there would be different places where people are looking at, right? So Yeah, so from your perspective, it's like, it's a huge area of places. So you have to cover really multiple things. So when we're talking about, let's say, technology, if you could share with our audience, our listeners, right? So people that are looking to buy specific technology, if you could share what would be the places where people are looking to buy, right? So what would be the cycle of converting if it's something that you can come up with right on the spot, right? So how can one convert and buy right from somebody who is interested in specific technology, and there are multiple vendors or providers of that technology, right? Yeah, so how do you make sure that you convert to that specific brand?
Yeah, so a couple ones that are our very close strategic partners. Onclusive is a great company. They essentially provide machine learning AI around how people are consuming earned content. They're also doing some amazing work when it comes to building attribution journeys. So that solves one of the biggest challenges, the last click attribution problem, where someone doesn't just wake up one day and decide to Google the product, and then Google and the ad or the paid search ad gets all of the credit for converting that person. They were inspired somewhere and they read something at some point during the week. And that is one of the things that Onclusive is doing really, really well. So we're actually one of their key strategic partners. And I definitely recommend kind of checking them out, understanding some of these new ways to understand the value and the effectiveness of earned content. From a social listening perspective, I would definitely recommend NetBase. I think they've been very good when it comes to customization, understanding the space. They've had some smart acquisitions over the last couple of years. Another great company is NewsWhip. This is a company that really helps you understand how stories go viral. They were started to really service the publisher industry first, because you had companies like the New York Times that were losing market share to BuzzFeed and to Quartz and to all of these very viral and socially first type of publications. So all of their data and their learnings come from that world, and they've started bringing that to marketers to help them understand how stories and how content goes viral or gets shared on social. And then really, from an influencer perspective, I would definitely recommend Fluency, which is ours. And the reason I say that is because we've quietly kind of built the largest influencer marketing platform. And we saw a lot of void in the space because there's a lot of point solutions. In my opinion, it's pre-consolidation right now. I think there's going to be a lot of there's a lot of startups. Everyone has an influencer marketing startup right now. But like I said, our biggest goal there was to not just create another influencer marketing platform, but to bring all the best of. We have multiple partners, over a dozen within this platform. So you can't even call it one solution. It's a multitude of all of the best of. And even if you don't, I guess, go in that direction, I think influencer marketing is so important for brands today. And I think that you want a solution that's going to allow you to get scale, but also measure truly beyond just impressions, just likes, just those things. It needs a connection into larger marketing funnels. And then the last piece I would say, and this is probably really important, is you need a very strong data partner at the top. Epsilon was a key acquisition for us, but whoever you use, you need someone that's going to act as that central hub. And that company needs to do this well, because as we're pushing things like PR and earned into much more of this digital realm, and we're tracking all the same things that you're seeing around cookies and clicks, attribution, machine learning, all of these data points, you need someone that's going to bring it all together so that all of your marketing, all of your efforts, everything that's data driven is connected at the core. You're using those insights and you're making everything smarter.
Okay, that's a remarkable advice. Thank you so much for sharing that, Bryan. And you know that I would be really interested to talk a little bit more about Fluency, right? Since it's essential part of your organization, MSL. And if you could tell about the success, how successful was the project, right? What is the onboarding of, for influencers, right? How do you onboard influencers? And how, there should be influencers in all the different areas, right? So if you go on Instagram, you would see one type of influencers, and those would probably not necessarily work for, some domain, like in technology, right? Going back to that. So, or maybe I'm mistaken. So if you could tell me how that actually works, right? That process of onboarding, how do you work with influencers, right? What kind of influence, do you have influencers for any industry, right? And how that essentially works?
Yeah, definitely. So, from a scale perspective, we index over 250 million influencers around the world, every type, every country, the smallest countries to the largest. The largest actually is the United States. I think China might be second, and then maybe the UK, I think, is after that. But when it comes to the platforms, the same thing. So you have to index across platforms. You have to be able to activate against platforms. TikTok has grown tremendously just in the last, definitely during 2020 during COVID, but I would say even in the last 6 months, it's really grown across the board. And we're seeing brands that you wouldn't think are TikTok audiences, but you have healthcare brands on there, pharma brands now. You've got all kinds of people, like you were saying before, around this idea of technology influencers. Absolutely. I mean, there's so many different types of influencers out there. But what's interesting is that we're also seeing a lot of companies that you wouldn't think are into the same thing as your traditional consumer brands, like healthcare companies, like insurance companies, all those kinds of industries. But a lot of them want to be more like consumer brands now, is what we're seeing. It doesn't take away from their traditional marketing efforts or the way that they've cultivated relationships with, thought leaders in the health space or in the technology space, but everything is starting to kind of blend together, right? We're seeing this idea of where does the consumer go to get their information these days? A lot of them are just going directly to social media. They're going to these influencers. In fact, during COVID, what we saw was governments around the world, everything from the World Health Organization to the CDC, they were paying influencers to talk about COVID because they thought that was the most effective way to get a healthcare message out to the masses these days. So it's just a very different world. And, when it comes to Fluency, I was saying before, what we've done well is we've incorporated the best of. We have some of the partners I mentioned earlier incorporated into that platform. We're also working with market leaders like IRI, which basically is the largest, retailer, and same store sales, things like that we can measure. We're connecting a lot of those data points, but even back to the earlier point of this idea of one centralized data partner, we're taking all those learnings and we're making all of the marketing smarter. So we're not just hiring influencers, but we're bringing back the insights as to what works, what type of messaging, what type of creative. We're using those insights to then fuel other types of marketing efforts, whether that's paid social or just traditional paid across the board. We're bringing all those great pieces of content and we're repurposing them into other channels. So that could be the brand owned channels. It could be in programmatic. It could be just paid social. It's also just amplifying the influencers' content directly to their audiences so that we can get greater reach there. So there's a lot of different tactics across the board, but I really think it's important that brands are embracing this and they have a real strategy, right? It should be something central and connected, not just a one-off when it comes to get some influencers, pay them some money, and have them just post some pictures about your product.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so how I see influencer marketing, right? It's a bit, people might be what we can see, people might be a bit tired of, the marketing traditional one, right? But where people actually can recognize that they are being sold to something, right? While through influencers, that's a more natural way, right? While you're listening to someone you actually trust or you like, right? So that they can, in more natural way, promote a brand or, interesting. So tell me about how marketing has been influenced during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? You mentioned a little bit, right? So I heard lots of, when I had the interview with advertising company and they said it was, close to disaster, right? Lots of ads were not running, etc. So what was the impact on marketing?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First off, I think that there was a lot of winners and losers, right? I mean, we have some clients that, let's say, any client that specializes in selling to your home, whether it's home goods, or cleaning materials or home improvement, they all did tremendously well because everyone's just at home all day and they're just buying more things that help their home life be better. And then obviously on the flip side, travel companies, all of those luxury experience type companies, they struggle. But, I think that one of the things that all of these companies uniformly started thinking about was this acceleration of digital transformation, because they're understanding this whole trend of direct to consumer. We've seen it now for a while, but I think it's really just massively accelerated the adoption and the thinking around that. And then from a marketing channel perspective, I think it did change a lot of spends across the board, like you're saying. Cord cutting, all-time high. So we're seeing less and less TVCs. I think a lot of the big advertisers in the world that have spent a lot of money in that space, I think that they've really started to change their opinion as to where they should be spending their dollars. We're all on Disney Plus and Netflix and HBO Max, and none of those places you can run advertisements. So there's been a lot of money pouring, obviously into digital, into these emerging social channels, into places that are very different. I think that the adoption of new platforms has been huge. So we saw a very, very big, it was an over 20% increase of engagement and content and influencers on TikTok and Twitch in particular, the gaming platform. We also saw a diversification of the platforms as well, because there were boycotts and there were issues around Facebook, for example, last summer. And we saw clients really experimenting with new platforms like Pinterest. I think that was one of the biggest winners actually coming out of the pandemic. And it really worked well because Pinterest is a place where you go for inspiration, and a lot of their focus has been on, great food, great kind of decoration, interior design. So they were kind of a perfect fit for that time. And as well, they're just not considered very controversial when it comes to political messaging or anything like that. So they saw some great growth. And, I think it's really opened up clients' minds to being more direct consumer, building more community, understanding more of a data first approach, because you can't just hope people are going to walk into a Walmart and pick something up off the shelf, because it didn't happen during COVID. And all of it's been just digital acceleration across the board.
Okay, interesting. So did you have to build any totally new strategies tailored for businesses affected by COVID-19? So
yeah, it's a great question. So one, I'm trying to think of a good example, but one client actually, actually Invisalign might be a good example. Invisalign, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the clear straighteners or aligners for your teeth. They saw a record quarter during COVID, 10-year record. And their CEO came out and basically said that it was the best they've performed in forever. And what we did was we completely switched their strategy over to TikTok. And we had a huge amount of influencers. We had some of the biggest influencers in the space working there. It was really taking advantage of this huge growth that we saw during COVID and everyone moving, especially, it started kind of in March of last year, and it just has really continued all the way since then. But we moved them into that space, and we kind of put a lot of the promotion for Invisalign into that space. And like I said, it was one of their most successful quarters in 10 years during COVID. And we're hoping to kind of continue to see that success in that area. But brands are experimenting, they're trying new platforms. They're taking advantage of some of these new behaviors and new channels that are getting popular during COVID.
Yeah, that's a very interesting case actually. And you know that because of, I like that you actually, what kind of platform you chose, right? Like TikTok, because of the specific age segment, right?
That's right.
That is actually hanging out there the most. And they would be the right audience for the product. So really interesting. Yeah. Okay. So Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you, right? And to listen about the marketing strategies, right? And about the influencer marketing. And I believe that is something that we are going to see more and more, right? The more powerful thing that lots of brands will be turning towards to. So thank you so much. It's been a real great pleasure.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.